You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
In particular, I want to just revisit this idea of central bank digital currency that I was talking about earlier on in the program briefly, and also a couple of weeks back, because this hasn't gotten a lot of coverage in Canada. Part of the reason is because we don't have a firm ironclad proposal, but we do know that the Bank of Canada is proceeding with this. They are talking about it, if you read their materials, as though it is inevitable, as though it's just this thing that's going to come. We're all mere passengers, and they're just going to shepherd us through this transition. And if you're someone who, like most people in Canadian society, walks around using your debit and credit card everywhere, you're probably thinking, all right, well, digital currency, what's the big deal? Electronic banking and digital currency are two very different things. And we'll talk about why that is now with Gleb Lisikh, who is a phenomenal writer with the C2C Journal. We've had him on before about his work there. And in particular, he has a great piece out this month, Hush Money, The Untold Dangers and Delusions of Central Bank Digital Currency. Gleb, good to have you back. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, nice to, thanks a lot for having me back here.
So let's talk first off with what central bank digital currency is, because I do think it's important people not conflate it with online banking and electronic finance, which is a pretty ubiquitous part of the finance system right now.
Well, the major difference in between CBDC or central bank digital currency is that it is controlled by the central bank, right? So the central bank has a liability to you for that currency. It's very similar to cash in that respect. So if you have a banknote, you can always go to the central bank and say, well, I need something for it. What we have right now as with commercial banks, you have the money, your online banking. These money are they belong to they sit with the commercial bank, right? And they don't really they're not affiliated with the central bank for the most part. The central bank just offers some insurance that these banks will pay you, let's say, cash. You can withdraw cash if you have an online banking account. So that's the major difference. The liability of CBDC, as with cash, lies with the central bank. The liability of the digital money we use now lies with the commercial banks.
One of the things that the government, the Bank of Canada, has told us on this is that it will remain available. It's an option. It's voluntary. It's not basically outlawing cash. But I've heard some people who don't really buy that. I mean, we already see in some ways aspects of a society that's moving beyond cash. There are some major retailers that have said they won't take cash in certain venues, and COVID was certainly a part of that. Do you buy, from what you've seen, that a central bank digital currency would coexist alongside cash, or do you think it would really eventually be a replacement?
Yeah, that's definitely how it is explained to everybody. Well, everybody, it's not widely advertised as to how CBDC exactly is going to behave in Canada, what it's going to do, but certainly the way the central bank, the government, is assuring us is that if CBDC gets introduced, it will not replace cash. It will not replace your online banking account or anything. It will just be an alternative, a third type of a currency. So, and obviously, if you read my article, you'll probably get from it that I have personally, I doubt that this is the case. There's no reasons for CBDC to be introduced as a third method of payment. There's absolutely no impetus, no incentives from the people who use money, right? And even central bank itself did the research on that. There's absolutely no need for it, right? That begs the question: if the CBDC gets introduced, then obviously it needs to take its place over something, and its over something is probably going to be cash. And we have examples in the world how it's been introduced. That's I explained it in my article. What happened in Nigeria, for example, where they went live with the CBDC under the same promise that CBDC is not going to replace cash. And as soon as the CBD, well, not as soon as a year after from the introduction of CBDC, they just cancel cash there. And half of the population in Nigeria relies on cash, and they canceled it, right? Despite of the promises. I'm not going to claim that it's going to happen exactly the same in Canada. Well, I'm just speculating on that, but I'm just saying that the promise is made. It's not going to replace anything. It's just going to be introduced as an option, as a convenience. But we know how it works for the most part. It gets introduced for a reason,
Mhm.
and right now I don't see any reason other than replacing something which is probably going to be cash.
I want to talk about the Nigeria case in just a moment, but before we get there, Gleb, I wanted to ask you about the offline aspect. I've mentioned when this topic has come up on the show in the past. We have a very real and very recent example of what happens when our telecom infrastructure is just hampered instantly, which is when the Rogers outage happened. I think it was about a year and a half ago, or 15 months
Mhm.
or so ago, and you had retailers who were entirely reliant on Rogers to run their debit and credit card terminals that couldn't do transactions. If people didn't have cash, they were up the creek without a paddle. And the central banks that are pushing CBDC kind of claim that they can find a way around this, but really there has been no solution proposed for what happens in a situation in which, for whatever reason, people cannot use an electronic device, in the which case you have power outages or whatnot. But they kind of avoid that. That's a big, giant, glaring problem in this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's pretty obvious to me. It should be for anybody that if you want to do an electronic transaction in between two parties, a seller and a buyer, at least one device needs to have power. Right. I mean, they are transmitting electromagnetic waves to exchange the information, so you must have power. There's no question about that. Whereas with cash, obviously, you just pass on the banknotes. So fundamentally, every solution about CBDC, and there are lots of interesting innovations, and that allow to exchange this currency in sort of a semi-offline mode, but they're all nowhere near in what cash offers in this respect. So it's a very long discussion. It's like all the offline solutions I couldn't fit into my article. They're pretty complicated, and you need to consider various scenarios as like a long-term outage, or is it just a short-term outage, how much cash you can exchange sort of in that semi-offline mode with the other party. Yeah, it's a bit convoluted, but again, it's cash is such a simple solution to all of that problems that CBDC brings up when we start talking about offline operation and stuff. So I'm not sure if I'm answering questions
Well,
in a
you are, and
straightforward
I
way.
said I wanted to go back to Nigeria because Nigeria had this pilot project originally, and it had very, very little uptake. And this is a very large country. Half of them are, as you say, reliant on cash. They did this, and I think it was 0.8% of people started using this, and then they expanded it. And what happened?
Yeah, so the way it started in Nigeria is that they introduced the CBDC in 2021, and just for the people who already had bank accounts, just to see what the uptake is going to be, I guess. And they only they didn't really see much of an adoption of CBDC. It was already obvious. Only 0.8% of that banked population downloaded the wallets, and they weren't using them at all. Like just, I guess, some curious people just downloaded a new free application to their phone and didn't really know what to do about it, and that's pretty much was the level of adoption. So, not much that. And a year later, the government, seeing those results, maybe they didn't want to take that as a as a voting choice of the constituents. They just decided to double down, and they just canceled cash and requested everybody, including those who did not have uh, accounts with banks, They just wanted them to bring their paper money to the bank offices and exchange that for the digital currency. That was a great failure, and people were literally starving there because they ended up with the paper money that was worthless, that would not be accepted anywhere. So and up until this moment, Nigerians don't understand what's going on. They don't understand the value that CBDC offers. They the adoption is happening, but that's only because of the artificial cash shortages. People just don't have any other choice.
Well, you mentioned in your essay here the advisors from the World Economic Forum and the International Monetary Fund. I mean, were they pushing this on Nigeria as just a massive experiment, or was this the Nigerian government that wanted to do this and then asked for some external advice, or do we not know kind of who the initiator was?
Yeah, they definitely had the advisors and consultants from the IMF and the World Economic Forum. I would probably put more emphasis on the IMF,
But
the
were
money.
they the ones pushing this? Did they kind of look at Nigeria as being, basically a lab for this CBDC experiment?
I honestly don't know much about who was pushing who, right? I just know that the consultants were there. They were pushing that agenda. I just don't understand why. Because actually, if we look at the World Economic Forum, they have a pretty decent framework for introducing CBDC. They give you a very balanced approach to what are the cons and pros of CBDC and what are the risks of, etc. So I was actually quite surprised at how unbiased that framework was. But if uh, in Nigeria case, it just didn't work, right?
Hmm.
For some reason, if they followed through that very same framework, they would have said, "No, guys, sir, you should stop immediately. Like, there's no way it's going to work, right?" Instead, they just pushed it through, right, onto the starving people. It just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not privy to all the details as to who exactly did what there and why, but you can judge that the results as to what happened there. It looks like they were just pushing that, whether it was coming from the government or from IMF or World Economic Forum. Well, obviously together they decided to push.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. I hadn't actually read about the Nigeria case until you put it in your essay there. People can read that at c2cjournal.ca. Hush Money, The Untold Dangers and Delusions of Central Bank Digital Currency. It's a lengthy read, but definitely a good one. Gleb Lisikh, the author, joins us now. Gleb, thanks for coming on as always. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.